That early morning, the sky over Chicago was as clear as if the whole city had just been washed clean. By the crisp light of early autumn, sunlight streamed through the massive glass panels of O'Hare International Airport, casting a golden glow across the gleaming stone floor, turning every movement into something out of a slow-motion film. The rhythmic roll of luggage wheels, the soft murmur of boarding calls over the intercom, and somewhere, the cheerful giggles of children all blended into a symphony of motion, of partings and unexpected reunions, amid the rush of passengers heading toward their gates. One boy stood still. Lucas Anderson, 12 years old, slender frame, with soft curls, was clutching a creased boarding pass tightly in his hand. His eyes held a maturity unusual for his age, though they couldn't hide a flicker of nervousness, a mixture of excitement and unease that came from preparing for his very first solo flight. The backpack on Lucas's shoulders was light. He only carried what truly mattered, a small bag of snacks prepared by his mother, an old navy blue over-ear headphone he'd used for 3 years, and a notebook with the first page scribbled in messy handwriting. Stuff plain invention ideas first draft. But the most precious item was hidden carefully in a side pocket. A handwritten letter from his mother, written the night before, when the two of them had sat by the window watching planes blink across the sky. On the neatly folded piece of paper, the small handwriting appeared like a gentle but profound reminder. Sit by the window, and don't forget to see the world with an open heart, my dear. Lucas remembered every word. This morning's flight was taking him to San Francisco, where his father was currently working at the headquarters of the tech conglomerate SkyConnect. His father had promised that if Lucas completed his summer assignments and kept his promise to be independent, he would be allowed to fly alone and visit the operations room, the place where the entire sky was managed with just a few clicks. It wasn't just a reward. To Lucas, it was the beginning of a dream, to become an aircraft designer of the future. He passed through the security checkpoint, never loosening his grip on the ticket as if it were a talisman guiding him on a special journey. Every step Lucas took on the cool stone floor brought him closer to that dream. And though this was his first time traveling without his mother by his side, he wasn't afraid, because among all his physical belongings, he also carried something invisible that adults often forget, a deep belief in himself. Gate 3-A appeared before him. The digital board flickered. Flight 711 Chicago gives San Francisco boarding.
First class 7:50 a.m. Lucas stepped into the priority line, where passengers in suits, gold watches, and real leather suitcases waited. He didn't hesitate. His ticket was for first class, booked by his father so Lucas can see the clouds from above. Unobstructed, a gift, and a declaration. His son deserved to be there. But what awaited him at the front of the line was far from what he expected. Just as Lucas was about to reach the check-in gate, a tall, middle-aged man in a black suit and a gray striped tie, the man standing just behind him, glanced at him and frowned. He didn't yell. He didn't scold. But his look, one of disdain and scrutiny, was enough to make Lucas feel as though he was standing in the wrong place. "Are you sure you're not lost, son?" the man asked. His tone was soft, but cold as steel. Lucas turned to him. "No, sir. My ticket is first class, seat 3A. The man looked down at Lucas's hand, where the boarding pass was now crumpled from being held too tightly. He narrowed his eyes, then jerked his chin. "Let me see that ticket." Lucas hesitated, but having been taught to be polite, he lifted the ticket up. The man didn't read it carefully. He didn't need a reason. With just a glance, he curled his lip. "Looks like you picked up someone else's ticket by mistake. I've seen this kind of thing before." Then, in a moment that felt like time freezing over, the man snatched the ticket from the boy's hand and tore it in half. Around them, some people in line began whispering. A few chuckles rose, the kind that came from those who enjoyed putting unruly kids in their place. Lucas stood still. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. But his face turned pale, his lips trembled. His hands clutched the letter from his mother inside his jacket pocket, as if holding on to something pure amid the chaos of injustice. At that moment, the sky outside remained blue. The sunlight still spilled golden across the terminal floor. But for Lucas, the world had just cracked, if only a little. The morning breeze drifted gently past the glass windows at Gate 3 to a space that, just minutes ago, had felt calm and undisturbed. But now, round Lucas, a strange silence had settled, not the silence of empathy, but one of avoidance, as if everyone was trying to look away to avoid facing an uncomfortable truth. A young black boy had just had his first-class ticket torn up by a white adult, and no one had stepped in to stop it. Lucas bent down to pick up the two torn halves of his ticket, his hands trembling with emotion. His heart pounded so hard it felt as if it might burst from his chest. But there were no tears in his eyes, only a quiet pain so deep it defied words. The man Charles Benton, a prominent figure in the tech industry, stood, unmoved, arms folded as if he had just fulfilled some noble civic duty. He glanced at his watch, then turned to a nearby airline staff member and said loudly, "Can someone please deal with this boy? He clearly doesn't belong in this area." A young flight attendant, wearing the blue jet uniform, stepped forward hesitantly. She looked at Lucas, then at Mr. Benton, visibly torn between duty and decency. Sweetie, may I see your ticket?" she asked softly. Lucas held out the torn pieces. She examined them closely. There was still enough information to confirm. Lucas Anderson, seat 3A, first class, flight 711. She froze, but before she could speak, Charles Benton cut in. "There's clearly been a mistake. Children don't fly first class alone like this. If the airline isn't careful, anyone could pretend to be someone they're not." The polite smile on his face was steeped in mockery, dripping with the stench of entitlement and prejudice. Lucas said nothing. Silently, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small phone. Not a flashy smartphone, just an older model, basic, good only for calls, texts, and storing a few important numbers. He dialed a number he had memorized by heart, each digit like a rung on a ladder toward safety. The phone connected. A deep, steady male voice came through on the other end. "Hello, Lucas. Are you at the gate already?" Lucas kept his voice calm. "Yes, Dad." Something happened. 2 seconds passed before the voice shifted in tone. "What is it? Are you okay?" He swallowed hard. "There's a man, he said I couldn't fly first class. He tore up my ticket." Silence on the other end. Then, "Steele, hand the phone to the nearest airline staff right now." Lucas handed the phone to the still confused flight attendant. "Hello, this is Ryan Anderson. I'm the Deputy CEO of SkyConnect, strategic partner and largest investor in Blue Jet Airlines. I want to know why my son, who has a valid first-class ticket, was just publicly humiliated." In front of other passengers, the flight attendant turned pale. She bowed her head and stammered, "I am so sorry, Mr. Anderson. The boy, he is in the system. This is a serious mistake. I'll call the shift manager immediately." "No, stay where you are. Don't let that man go anywhere. And I want to speak to the airport's shift director within the next 5 minutes." "Understood." "Yes, sir." Lucas stood there, taking the phone back, hearing his father's calm voice say, "Are you okay? You did nothing wrong, and you're not alone. Stay calm, I'll handle the rest." He hung up. The boy clenched his fist. The hesitation in his eyes was gone. In its place, resolve. Just minutes later, from the airport's operations office, a group of people in black suits rushed in. Leading them was a determined-looking middle-aged woman wearing a name tag, Sandra Mallory, Blue Jet Morning Operations Manager. She approached, spoke quietly with the attendant, then turned to Lucas with a warm but serious tone. "You must be Lucas Anderson. I'm terribly sorry for what's happened. This was a serious error, and I'll personally ensure you're treated with the respect you deserve from now on." Then she turned to Charles Benton, still standing with arms crossed. Feigning disinterest, "Are you the one who tore up this young passenger's ticket?" He smirked. "I did what anyone would have thought. No one expects a black kid to be flying first class." "Then you'll be the first passenger removed from this gate today," Sandra signaled. Two security personnel stepped forward. "You are hereby suspended from boarding any Bluejet flight pending an investigation into harassment and racial discrimination. Any complaints you may have can be directed to the executive board. For now, please leave the area." The atmosphere shifted. Those who had previously looked away now began whispering, murmuring, but this time, not with indifference. An elderly woman stepped forward, placed her hand gently on Lucas's shoulder, and whispered, "You're very brave, sweetheart." Lucas didn't speak, but a small smile appeared on his lips like a ray of early sunlight cutting through the tension. Sandra escorted Lucas to the counter and printed him a new ticket. But this time, it wasn't just seat 3A. His ticket now bore a new label, Passenger of Honor. Lucas returned to the waiting area, took a seat, and for the first time, opened the letter his mother had written bathed in the soft morning light. "My dear child, if anyone ever doubts you, remember you don't need to shout to prove your worth. Your kindness and strength will speak for themselves." And indeed, that morning, an entire airline began to tremble, not because the boy had raised his voice, but because he had stayed silent when it mattered most. On board the Bluejet Boeing 787, the soft glow of LED lights filled the first-class cabin like a quiet overture of serenity. The wide, dark chocolate leather seats, curved gently to embrace each passenger, now sat in an unusual stillness. As Lucas Anderson stepped into the cabin with his freshly printed Passenger of Honor ticket, still fragrant with ink and paper, every gaze turned toward him, but they no longer carried suspicion. Instead, they held a blend of curiosity, caution, and something akin to unease. He walked slowly toward seat 3A, his original seat, the very place that had become the eye of an invisible storm just minutes before. A new lead flight attendant, Amelia Grant, around 30, tall and elegant, gave Lucas a slight bow, as one would to a very special guest. "Hello, Lucas. It's an honor to serve you today. If you need anything at all, just press the call button on your armrest, and I'll be right there." Lucas nodded politely. "Thank you, ma'am." He sat down, fastened his seatbelt, and looked straight ahead. But from the left, a middle-aged man, a businesslike figure with silver-rimmed glasses, gently tilted his head. "Are you Ryan Anderson's son?" Lucas turned. The man didn't sound hostile, but he was clearly studying the boy closely. "Yes, sir." The man nodded slowly. "I attended a conference where your father spoke about equity in technology. He's quite an influential man." Lucas wasn't sure how to respond, but the businessman didn't continue the conversation. He simply offered a small smile and added, "Today, you made a lot of grown-ups think twice." The remark, simple as it was, echoed in Lucas's mind like a quiet bell. He had never imagined that he could make grown-ups pause, reflect, simply through silence and a single phone call. A few minutes later, another passenger, a woman named Elise Gordon, in her 50s, slender, dressed in a pale smoky silk coat, gently approached. She introduced herself as a freelance journalist. She didn't pull out a phone. She didn't ask probing questions. She simply said, "Would you like to tell me anything?" Not for a story, just for an adult who wants to understand better. Lucas looked at her for a moment. He remembered what his mother had once told him. Not everyone who asks a question wants to hurt you. Some ask so they can learn how to stand with you. So he nodded. "I don't know how I stayed calm at that moment," Lucas said slowly. "But I knew that if I reacted the way they expected, I'd become the problem instead of the victim." Elise said nothing. Her eyes glistened, and she responded with only one sentence. "You just said something that takes most adults half a lifetime to understand." Just then, the seatbelt sign chimed. The captain was preparing for takeoff. But deep inside Lucas, something had already left the ground, the invisible burden he had learned to hide for years. Through school days, field trips, Even quiet visits to the grocery store where staff followed him around. Simply because he didn't look like everyone else, the plane gently pulled away from the runway, ascending into the open sky. Lucas looked out the window. The white clouds passed by layer after layer. A feeling of weightlessness spread through him, not because of altitude, but because, for the first time in his life, he felt he no longer had to lower his head. Once the flight reached cruising altitude, Amelia returned, carrying a tray of elegant in-flight dining, complete with a chocolate cake topped with fresh strawberries for dessert. She smiled softly and said, "This one's just for today's passenger of honor, Lucas Anderson." Lucas gave a shy smile. "You don't have to make me feel special, Mum." "But you are," Amelia replied, her eyes warm with sincerity. "And sometimes, showing someone they're valued is how the world learns kindness again." He bowed his head in thanks. But as she walked away, Lucas suddenly noticed a small detail. The spot where his ticket had been torn still left a faint crease on the tray table in front of him. Like a scar, not bleeding, not loud, but enough to remind him that someone once thought he didn't belong. Simply because of his skin and age, Lucas opened his notebook, turned to a blank page. He began to draw not a plane, not a seat, but a sign, one that bore these bold, clear words: "First class isn't measured by tickets but by character." As the Bluejet Boeing 787 leveled out at 35,000 feet, everything in the first-class cabin seemed to return to normal. The flight attendant smiled, soft conversations rippled through the aisles, and sunlight filtered in through the windows, painting warm golden stripes across the cabin. But for Lucas Anderson, this wasn't a normal flight, and it wasn't a moment that could be easily forgotten. He gazed out at the vast sky, but his mind was filled with its opposite, with the doubtful looks when he first stepped into first class, the torn ticket never accompanied by an apology, and the thinly veiled contempt in the eyes of the original flight attendant, Sophia Brenner. Though she had been replaced after the phone call, Sophia hadn't left the plane. She had been reassigned to the economy cabin as a temporary measure, while the airline processed the incident. But just behind the thin curtain dividing first class from economy, a storm was still quietly brewing. In the economy cabin, Sophia sat tucked into a crew jump seat, her face no longer calm as it had been when she had blocked Lucas. Now, her expression was taut, her hands clasped so tightly they had gone pale. The phone in her uniform pocket vibrated again and again, but she didn't dare check it. A fellow flight attendant, Carla Nguyen, Vietnamese-American, leaned in and whispered, "Sophia, the news is spreading. Someone in the cabin recorded you tearing up the ticket." Sophia jerked her head around, whispering in panic, "That's impossible. We all saw," Carla replied, no longer speaking like a teammate. "No one spoke up because we were afraid. You thought you had power because your father's the regional HR director. But Lucas isn't just any kid." Sophia fell silent. That name, Lucas Anderson, was now a keyword echoing throughout the company's internal network. Not because he did anything wrong, but because he didn't do anything at all. No shouting, no demands. Just one phone call and everything turned upside down. "This won't end here." Meanwhile, back in first class, Lucas quietly continued writing in his notebook. But then something unexpected happened. The cabin door opened slightly, and a familiar figure stepped in. It was Captain Douglas, the pilot of today's flight. In his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and eyes both sharp and composed, he entered, removed his cap, and gave a slight bow to Lucas, an action that instantly silenced the entire cabin. "Hello, Lucas," he said in a deep, steady voice. "I wanted to meet you earlier, but needed to ensure flight safety first." Lucas stood up politely. "I didn't think my small problem would require your attention." Sir Douglas cut him off with a warm look. "Nothing is small when it touches someone's dignity." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Lucas could hear. "I want you to know the moment your call was verified, our executive team was alerted, and your father, Mr. Ryan Anderson, didn't ask for special treatment. He only said 3 words: check the process. Lucas blinked, startled but touched. His father hadn't said my son was insulted or give him his seat back. He said, "Check the process." 3 words enough to make the entire system examine itself. Douglas continued, "I've been a pilot for a long time, seen a lot. But today, I realized I still have more to learn from a 17-year-old boy. Thank you, Lucas." Lucas felt his throat tighten. For the first time in his life, an adult hadn't just said sorry. They had said thank you. Because his silence had become the voice for countless children once labeled too young, too loud, too black to be believed. A silent message from his father at that moment. Lucas's phone vibrated softly. He opened it. A message from his father. "You did the right thing, and you made the world listen." No flair, no dramatics. But to Lucas, it was the highest badge of honor. He took a deep breath and looked forward where the cabin lights glowed gently ahead, like the start of something new. Shifting gaze, the flight continued smoothly. But the atmosphere had changed. Those passengers who once glanced at Lucas with quiet skepticism were now approaching him. One was a professor, another, an investor. Even a 70-year-old woman who had flown first class more than 50 times extended an invitation for Lucas to join her for lunch. Lucas didn't refuse anyone, but he didn't boast either. He simply smiled, nodded, and listened, because he understood the eyes that once doubted him were now being healed, not by power, but by quiet, unwavering presence. And in the economy cabin, Sophia Brenner stared forward in silence. A young black girl walked past, looked up at her, and softly asked, "Are you the lady who yelled at that boy?" Sophia froze. The girl's tone wasn't accusatory, just curious. She didn't answer. She bowed her head for the first time, unable to form an excuse. Because Sophia understood, from now on, it wouldn't just be the airline that needed to check the process. It would be her own conscience. As the flight continued to glide smoothly above layers of white clouds, a high-level emergency meeting was unfolding at the headquarters of Aurelia Airlines in Chicago. Inside the boardroom known as the Compass Room, a space usually reserved for multi-million-dollar strategic sessions or top-tier crises, tensions were mounting. In the glass-walled chamber trimmed with mahogany, Elaine Carrington, the company's director of strategic communications, set her iPad down on the table, her expression cold and unreadable. Beside her sat Jared Monahan, the CEO, a powerful, discreet figure that no one in the aviation industry dared underestimate. On the large screen at the front of the room, a 52-second video played on loop, the clip of flight attendant Sophia Brenner aggressively tearing the ticket of a young black passenger. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. But it was the silence of the boy that had become the sharpest voice of all. Elaine spoke softly, her words slicing through the air like a scalpel. "This clip has reached 1.4 million views. In just 4 hours, the hashtag #LethamBoard is trending nationwide on Twitter. 27 media outlets have requested an official statement." And she looked at Jared, steadying her tone. "The boy in the video is Ryan Anderson's son." The room went dead silent. Ryan Anderson, a name that echoed like thunder in both financial and aviation circles. Former Chief Strategy Officer of the FAA, current Chairman of the National Transportation Equity Council, and major shareholder in 3 major airlines. He rarely appeared in public, but his fingerprints were all over every procedural reform and internal policy reshuffle across the industry. The fact that his son Lucas Anderson had been treated this way aboard an Aurelia flight wasn't just an unfortunate incident, it was a spark in dry grass. Jared exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the glass walls reflecting the fading amber light of dusk. "Elaine, call him directly." Elaine nodded. The video call was initiated. After just 3 rings, Ryan Anderson's face appeared on the screen, lit softly by the warm glow of his personal library, where rows of books and aviation reform drafts stood behind him. He wasn't angry. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I'm not calling to demand justice for my son. I'm calling for the hundreds, The thousands of passengers who never had the chance he did. Today, it was Lucas. Tomorrow, who will it be? The truth hurts, but silence hurts more. Jared listened, as if each word Ryan spoke was a verdict. Ryan continued, I helped develop the Safe Seat program, the very one your airline once adopted. But it's clear, a policy is only elegant on paper if your people don't understand its soul. A ticket can be torn, but human dignity cannot. His final sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water, heavy and irreversible. Elaine jotted every word. Jared glanced at his watch. We need guidance, he said plainly. We need to act before the public does it for us. Ryan replied without hesitation. Let someone who's been harmed become your advisor. Lucas invited as honorary youth advisor an hour later. Aboard the descending flight, the lead flight attendant made an announcement. Lucas had a special call waiting. He stepped into the private cabin, and there, on the screen, was his father, Ryan Anderson. Are you ready for a new kind of journey? Ryan asked, his voice calm, his eyes full of quiet pride. Lucas blinked. You want me to do what? Join Aurelia's Passenger Conduct Reform Council. Not as a consultant with theories, but as someone who's lived the experience, with heart. Lucas was silent for a few moments. He had never imagined that his pain might lead to the chance to create change. I don't know if I'm old enough. No one's old enough to teach others how to listen, Ryan smiled. You just have to be yourself, and hold on to the powerful silence you showed today. Lucas nodded gently, and for the first time, he felt that his unspoken voice had touched something far greater. The first person who must learn again is Sophia. Meanwhile, in the economy cabin, Sophia Brenner officially received notice of an internal investigation. But it wasn't just a cold, procedural report. She was required to attend a 6-week professional reflection program where each flight attendant must confront video footage of their own behavior, analyze every word, every gesture, and more importantly, understand why it caused harm after the flight landed. Sophia sat alone at the terminal, holding a printed still from the leaked video the moment she tore up Lucas's ticket. She stared into the boy's eyes, in the image not filled with anger or hatred, just a quiet, deeply wounding hurt, a kind of hurt that didn't scream but made an entire system bow its head. From one small flight to a national awakening that evening, media outlets announced Aurelia Airlines would hold a special press conference in Chicago, and the keynote speaker would not be the CEO, not the head of PR, but Lucas Anderson, age 17. A new hashtag began to spread, Leffenbeheard, because sometimes the ones who don't shout, who don't pound the table, are the ones who make the world stop and look again. The morning in Chicago began with a soft golden light streaming through the glass panels of the Aurelia Airlines headquarters, but no one in the building that day felt light. On the 32nd floor, a space usually reserved for high-stakes shareholder strategy sessions or ceremonial partnership signings, the atmosphere had changed. There was no flashy backdrop, no MC with an earpiece or cue cards, just a long wooden table, a few microphones, some water bottles, and rows of seats neatly ranged for the press. At the center of the room, a single large sign read, Listen, Don't React, Forum on In-Flight Behavior and Human Dignity. The spotlight wasn't on the CEO. It was on a boy in a gray sweater. Lucas Anderson entered the room in simple clothing, khaki pants, a crewneck gray sweater, and white sneakers, no tie, no prepared speech. But as he sat down at the speaker's chair, the entire room seemed to hold its breath for a few beats. Cameras slowly turned in his direction. Flashbulbs flickered. A reporter from NBC whispered into her mic, Word is, this boy may change how airlines train their cabin crews. Lucas looked around, took a deep breath, and began, I'm not here to retell my story. I'm here to speak for those who never got the chance to tell theirs. His voice was low, a little shaky, but steady. Not the polished tone of someone coached by a PR team, but the real voice of someone who had just stepped through pain and was slowly learning how to name it. I know some people think, He's sitting here because his father is powerful. But the truth is, when my ticket was torn, no one asked who I was. And I didn't think I had to be someone to be respected." He paused. The room stayed still. I wasn't upset about missing a flight. I was upset that a grown adult, someone representing an airline, thought my silence meant I was easy to dismiss, powerless, voiceless. There are people who get their presence torn away every day, and no one turns back to notice. That line made the note-takers look up. Lucas continued, this time locking eyes with the Aurelia executive board seated in the front row. Not everyone has a phone to record what happens. Not everyone has a father in a high place. But everyone has dignity. And if this airline truly wants to reform, start by retraining how your people see other people, not just how they serve them. Scattered applause broke out, but Lucas didn't pause for praise. I don't want a special seat for myself. I want every seat, from economy to first class, to carry the same worth and human dignity. No one had expected a grand orator, but the boy had just made an entire industry rewrite its notes. Across social media, the live stream spread like wildfire. Hashtags Dignity there, Lucas speaks, and Listen First began trending nationally within 45 minutes. In New York, veteran journalist Jeffrey Monroe wrote on X, formerly Twitter, a 17-year-old boy didn't just share his experience, he mapped out a path for an entire industry that thought itself untouchable. I've never heard anyone say, I don't want privilege, I want fairness, so truthfully. And elsewhere, Sophia Brenner was watching the live stream from a private training room. She cried. The training center, far from the corporate spotlight, was where a select few were sent for conduct below standards. Before her was a laptop screen, and on it, Lucas was saying words not aimed at her, but each one landed like a quiet incision. She bowed her head into her hands. No one needed to scold her anymore, because in that moment, she knew exactly where she went wrong. The real hurt didn't come from being insulted. It came from the silence that followed. When Lucas exited the press forum, he gave no further interviews. He simply said, I think I've said enough. What comes next is up to the adults. That line was printed in bold on the front page of the Chicago Tribune the next morning. Beneath it, the headline read, The boy who made an industry look inward within 12 hours of the speech. Aurelia Airlines officially announced a full retraining of 100% of flight attendants and ground staff, focused on listening skills, behavioral equity, and handling vulnerable passengers. The creation of a Youth Passenger Advisory Council, with Lucas Anderson as its inaugural member. A 6-month media campaign, See the Person Not the Profile, in partnership with the non-profit founded by Lucas's father. And that night, in a quiet corner of his bedroom, Lucas opened his old notebook and wrote, The flight was delayed, but dignity is taking off. When the public's quiet hero stepped out of the spotlight, in a private room elsewhere, someone forgotten was writing the first true confession of her life. Sophia Brenner had always believed she was a good flight attendant, by the book, on time, up to standard. But no one had ever taught her that following protocol could still mean failing morally. After being suspended and stripped of the uniform that once filled her with pride, Sophia now sat in a special training room, a place for employees deemed in need of service mindset realignment. She was handed a thick file titled, Your Customers Measure You, Not Your Supervisors. The first page asked a single question, Did you truly see the human being behind the behavior you disciplined? That night, Sophia did something she had never done in her 15 years of flying. She wrote an apology letter, not knowing if it would ever be read. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper, picked up a pen, and began, Lucas Anderson, I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't even know if this letter will ever reach you. But I'm writing it because I need to face myself, the woman who yelled, who judged, and who didn't listen to a single word you said that day. I remember your eyes, not angry, not rebellious, just heartbreakingly calm. Now I understand. It wasn't submission. It was dignity, wounded, but still standing tall. I was trained to smile, But I was never taught how to truly listen to a silent passenger. Sophia paused. Tears rolled down her cheeks and onto the paper. Meanwhile, across America, emotions were stirring not out of outrage this time, but from deep empathy. Rival airlines began launching clean cabin campaigns, conducting internal audits of staff behavior. Some held listening sessions with passengers who had previously filed complaints, aiming to better understand the invisible harms they'd endured. But the most unexpected shift didn't come from an airline. It came from a silver-haired woman in Louisville, Kentucky. Her name was Agnes Moore, and she had once been yelled at by Sophia herself 3 years ago for talking too loudly to her granddaughter on a flight. Now 74, Agnes found Lucas's video online, and something about it stirred a silent connection between them. She dug out an old travel journal where she had once written, "The flight attendant wouldn't let me call to wish my granddaughter happy birthday because I was speaking too loudly. No one ever asked why I spoke that way." Agnes was slightly hearing impaired, and that day, Sophia hadn't known and didn't care. Agnes decided to write a handwritten letter, her first in years, and mailed it to Aurelia Airlines headquarters. "I'm not asking for a refund or an apology. I just want that flight attendant to know my loud voice that day was due to a broken hearing aid, not a lack of respect. If she's still working there, I hope she's learned to ask before she assumes." That letter, once rooted to the airline's ethics division, reached Sophia's desk, and it shattered her. There were no images, no cameras, just a quietly painful truth, one small story, enough to bring a woman who had thought she was just following rules to tears like a child. Sophia placed both letters, hers and Agnes's, on the table. Then she did something else she had never done. She submitted a formal request to transfer out of her flight duties. She no longer wanted to be a flight attendant. She wanted to become a trainer, teaching new hires about dignity and empathy. And Lucas, he knew nothing about the letters, but he was beginning to receive many others. From an Asian boy who had been forced to switch seats because someone said he was in the wrong row, a single mother whose daughter had once been ordered not to laugh too loudly by a flight attendant, a Latino father who wrote that he wept when he heard Lucas say, "I don't want privilege, I want fairness." Lucas read every letter, took notes. He created a digital folder titled "Stories Hidden Under the Seats." And then he told his father, "I don't want to be a symbol. I want to become a system that collects truth." That's how the idea for a new online platform was born. Airspace Voices, a safe place for passengers to share experiences of discrimination while flying. Every verified story would be forwarded to the relevant airline, not just as a complaint, but as an ethical report, not to punish, but to remind them each ticket sold isn't just money, it's trust. While the public began to see Lucas as a symbol of the generation that won't bow, he simply continued working quietly and changing things bit by bit. And Sophia, in a new classroom, standing before a group of trainee flight attendants, she said, "If you see a passenger staying silent, don't assume they agree with you. They might just be swallowing a wound you haven't noticed yet." And somewhere far away, Agnes sat sipping tea. She smiled as she read a news article about the airline's newest training program. Listen First, taught by Sophia Brenner. Silence can be the highest form of resistance, but at some point, even silence feels like betrayal. Nearly 2 months after Flight 457 became the epicenter of national headlines, the atmosphere at Aurelia Airlines headquarters had begun to settle. Boardrooms no longer echoed with talks of PR crises. Media attention drifted elsewhere, and Lucas Anderson, the teenager who once left a nation speechless, was gradually returning to school life like a storm that had passed. What he didn't know was that another storm was forming, quieter, subtler, and far more ruthless. A file, unsigned, unmarked, lands with explosive weight. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a veteran journalist at the New York Tribune received an anonymous email. Subject line, just 3 words, Aurelia Airlines internal. She almost dismissed it as spam, but upon opening it, She heard a 47-minute audio recording, not perfect in quality, but clear enough to recognize the voices of our alias senior executives, captured in a private meeting. There was no remorse, no ethical reckoning. Instead, the tone was mocking, dismissive, and steeped in deflection. The kid just got lucky because his dad's an investor. Otherwise, who would care? We need internal strength, not weakness over some black kid crying in first class. What we need is tighter staff, ones who know when to shut up, not cuddle passengers. Laughter crackled near the end, then the pop of a water bottle cap. The article dropped 24 hours later. No clickbait headline, just cold, stark truth. Aurelia Airlines, behind the curtain. Within 12 hours, it was the most talked about piece in the country. Social media exploded in outrage. But oddly, Lucas said nothing. He read the article, watched the frame-by-frame analysis of the audio. His eyes didn't well up. There was only a hollow silence, the kind that forms when fragile trust is crushed completely. At school, people watched him, waiting, expecting something. But Lucas didn't speak. No post, no video, no interview. The only person he confided in was his mother, Ava Anderson. In their small kitchen, he spoke like an exhale. I used to think if I stayed silent, they'd have no choice but to listen. But maybe they just used my silence to stage a cleaner narrative. Ava didn't urge him to fight back. She simply told a story. How, when she was younger, she applied to an airline, but was rejected, told she didn't have the right look for the brand. I stayed quiet, and they kept doing it to others. But you, Lucas, you made them pause, even if only for a moment. Then came the second blow. Lucas received an email, no name, no subject, just one attachment, an internal chart used in pilot trainee admissions. What stunned him wasn't the chart itself, but the small note in the corner. Priority list. Internal hires be referrals. CVIP customers do not accept applicants from underdeveloped regions or with language barriers unless under executive sponsorship. His hands shook. This wasn't just racism. This was systemic stratification of opportunity. That night, Lucas uploaded a video. No music, no effects. Just a 17-year-old boy in front of a webcam, his eyes no longer gleaming as they once did. He spoke slowly, each word a weight. Today, I don't speak for anyone, not for a community, not for passengers. I'm just one young person, here to say this. I believed, and I was hurt by the very people I tried to protect. If a child has to choose between truth and peace, then we have failed to create a world worth living in. I won't stay silent anymore. The video hit 3 million views in 10 hours. But more importantly, it ignited a chain reaction. 3 former Aurelia staff confirmed the audio was authentic. A whistleblower from the pilot training center sent Lucas the full internal files, exposing discriminatory admissions. And most shockingly, Claire Rowan, a respected senior flight attendant, resigned publicly, declaring, "I refuse to teach young crews how to bow to wrongness." In Congress, a group of senators called for a special hearing, systemic discrimination in aviation, and the first person invited to testify, Lucas Anderson. But this time, he didn't drive with his father. He didn't bring a lawyer. He brought a clear box. Inside were 2 letters, one from his mother, and one unsent apology from Sophia Brenner. Lucas stood before the hearing and said, "What I bring today is not evidence, but the things people write when they have nothing left to lose. I stand here not to recount my own hurt, but to speak for the thousands who were pushed out of first class, not because of their behavior, but because they didn't match someone's idea of who deserved the seat." Silence is no longer a safe option, and truthfully it never was. Silence is a choice, but when the truth steps into the light, sometimes it's our words that become the heaviest burden of all. After a deeply emotional congressional hearing, the name Lucas Anderson once again graced the front pages of major newspapers, not because of a lawsuit or a viral clip, but because of how a 17-year-old stood with quiet conviction, intelligence, and an almost disarming humanity in the face of systemic injustice. The nation seemed to pause, collectively listening to a high school student speak about justice without theatrics, about dignity without embellishment, and about worthiness that doesn't require justification by skin color. But behind the cameras, the applause, and the headlines, an unexpected, private meeting was being quietly arranged between Lucas and a man he never thought he'd confront: Richard Beckman. Beckman, the vice president of human resources at Aurelia Airlines, was the loudest voice on the leaked audio recording that shook public trust. He was the one who said Lucas only mattered because of his father's investments, and that they shouldn't let the emotions of a black kid dictate the system. He had refused all interview requests, stayed silent, dodged the media. But after watching Lucas's testimony, he made a single phone call to the company's legal team. "I want to talk," he said, "but not to the press. I want to meet the boy." The meeting was arranged in a modest conference room at the bottom floor of a quiet DC hotel. No cameras, no journalists, no mediators. Just two people, one representing the new generation, and the other, a man once perched at the summit of corporate power, now standing at the edge of its collapse. Lucas entered, walking tall, eyes forward, holding a folder. Beckman was already seated, light gray suit, no tie, thinning silver hair. He didn't look like a villain. He didn't look like someone preparing to apologize either. The silence between them stretched for nearly 40 seconds. They simply looked at each other, no rush to speak. Finally, Lucas broke the stillness. No rage, no coldness, just an honest question. "Why did you want to meet me?" Beckman looked directly at him. "Because I needed to see the face I once reduced to a problem." Lucas tilted his head slightly. "And now that you've seen it, what do you think?" The older man inhaled deeply. His eyes, lined with fatigue, didn't hold dramatic remorsefully the weariness of someone who's just survived a storm he helped create. "I think I've lived too long in a system where people like me get to decide who's worthy. And I didn't realize how many others I locked out with the judgments I thought were objective." Lucas placed the folder on the table. Inside, a copy of his Pilot Academy application, submitted the year before, long before any of this happened. At the bottom, handwritten notes from the admissions committee: good GPA, good conduct, fluent in languages, but lacks notable leadership presence. Suggestion: consider candidates more aligned with brand image. Lucas offered a faint, dry smile. "And that brand image, you know what it meant, don't you?" Beckman said nothing. Lucas didn't need an answer. He continued, voice steady yet accusatory. "I'm not here for an apology, because I know apologies don't undo anything. What I need you to understand is, what you said in that Reeker Dingweather, you meant for the world to hear it or not, was the truest version of your heart. And unfortunately, it wasn't just your heart. It belongs to an entire system." The room was so quiet. The ticking wall clock sounded like a metronome. Then, unexpectedly, Beckman let out a faint chuckle, not mocking, but the kind that escapes when a weight finally lifts. "Do you think I should be fired?" Lucas didn't respond right away. He looked the man in the eye, neither angry nor scornful. "I think you need to stop being the one who makes decisions, and start learning how to listen to the people whose lives those decisions have impacted." The meeting ended after nearly an hour. There was no handshake, no dramatic reconciliation, just a quiet nod from Lucas before he turned and walked away. As he passed through the hallway, he noticed a hotel worker, a middle-aged man with brown skin, pushing a cleaning cart. The man nodded at him. Lucas smiled back and walked on. That night, Richard Beckman sent a short email to the Aurelia Airlines board. Subject line: "I resignate because of the media, but because I finally heard myself elsewhere." Lucas uploaded a single photo to his social media, a picture of his Ray-approved Flight Academy application, with a handwritten note in blue ink at the bottom: "We were wrong, and we need you to help us fix it." He wrote nothing else. There are moments that require no applause, no roaring crowds, yet they quietly mark the beginning of a new chapter in history. Not through noise, but through silence, belief, and the unfurling of wings for those once grounded by prejudice. That morning in Washington, D.C., The sky was strikingly blue. Sunlight streamed through the glass panels of Reagan National Airport, spilling like a golden carpet across the stone floor. To most, it seemed like any ordinary day except for those gathered at Gate 9B. Lucas Anderson wore his aviation trainee uniform for the very first time. It wasn't elaborate. No shimmering gold insignia, no prestigious flight wings. Just a crisp white shirt, a simple navy tie, and a name badge that read, Lucas Anderson Trainee Flight Observer 01. But to Lucas, this wasn't just a training session. It was a flight into the future, not only for himself, but for everyone who'd ever been denied even the right to dream. Inside a Boeing 787 parked quietly on the western tarmac, the flight crew was already in position. Captain Elena Sharpie, a seasoned pilot with over 2 decades in the sky, was the first to shake Lucas's hand as he entered the cockpit. She smiled warmly. "I've read about you. And today, instead of fighting, I hope you just learn to feel the sky." Lucas nodded, throat tight but eyes bright. "Yes, Captain. I'll learn with all my heart." Before takeoff, Lucas sat in the jump seat beside the cockpit, his eyes fixed on the control panels, though his thoughts wandered backward to all the rejections. The skeptical stares, the mocking voices claiming that a black boy could never possess the leadership qualities to pilot a multi-million-dollar aircraft through the heavens. For a long time, Lucas believed he had to become a perfect version of himself to be accepted. But today, he realized, no one needs to be perfect to deserve respect. We just need to be treated fairly, heard sincerely, and centrally seen as human beings. The indicator lights on the screen shifted from amber to green. From the tower came a voice, "Flight 807. You're clear for takeoff on runway 3L. Good wind. Godspeed." Lucas tightened his seatbelt. Captain Elena calmly advanced the throttle. The engines roared to life and no one said a word. Then, the aircraft lifted from the ground, and a single tear slipped down Lucas's chin, not from fear, but because for the first time, he wasn't the passenger questioned for his skin color. He was helping chart the course for the entire journey. At that same moment, in a modest hall on the 15th floor of Aurelia Airlines Chicago headquarters, a quiet event was taking place. No media, no live stream, just an internal gathering where executives and employees came together to sign off on the final document of the company's internal reform. Equity Flight Initiative. Flying without barriers. At the signing table stood Tamara Dorsey, the airline's new president, a flight attendant, now a woman of color leading change from the top. She spoke plainly, but with deep conviction. "From this day forward, we don't just fly between cities. We fly beyond the boundaries of outdated thinking." An hour later, Lucas's flight landed safely in Atlanta. Before exiting the cockpit, he turned to Captain Elena. "Thank you for believing in me." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up. Because of you, the door is now wider for many more to follow." Lucas stepped into the terminal hallway, where a group of elementary students were touring the airport. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, with curly hair and oversized glasses, spotted him and shouted, "Mom, is he a pilot?" Her mother smiled. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I do know you can be like him if you want to." Lucas turned back and nodded gently to the little girl. She beamed and waved. He waved back. That night, Lucas posted a short note on his personal page. No dramatic tone, no condemnation. Just a single, quiet thought. The sky doesn't ask who you are. It only asks, are you ready? And today I was ready. The post was shared over 2 million times in 24 hours. 1 week later, at JFK Airport, a new billboard appeared above the international departure gate. It wasn't advertising a product or a promotion. It was a photo of a young man in a pilot's uniform, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. And the caption beneath it read, "Lucas Anderson, his first flight was the beginning of ours. Fly without barriers. Fly for equity." And so, the teenager who was once stripped of his first-class seat because of the color of his skin, now sat in the very first seat of a brand new chapter in American aviation, not to be served, but to steer. to lead, and to change the system from within.